So our goals for this session are to, for educators to have background information about the current state of data collection and use for special education programming, knowledge of how to interpret types of data and evidence already being collected for students with disability, an understanding of how those data connect with classroom data, and techniques for using special education data to make decisions about instruction for students with disabilities in inclusion classrooms. Our agenda will set the stage of why special education data is important, introduce different types of data, connect special education data to classroom data, and then we're going to end with a data-driven activity. Our norms for our session are to be present, to be kind, to be curious, to be generous, to be supportive, and share your knowledge. What do we mean by share your knowledge? We encourage you to ask questions in the chat, and if you know the answer, please go ahead and jump in. Don't wait for Sarah and I to get a chance to answer them. We would love to have a dialogue going in the chat about the information we're presenting. So we'd like to make this as interactive as possible, given that we are all in our homes in this strange time. All right. So a little bit about me. My name is Jenna Umansky. I am the founder of the Umansky Education Group. We are a consulting, advocacy, and business. We're here to support schools and families as they work with children to reach their educational goals. We will help strengthen your school's general or special education programs, professionally advocate for your children's needs, and help all children achieve their potential. We believe that collaboration and support between adults leads to growth by children. Some of our current and future projects include running an online job training paid summer internship for high school students at local charter schools who have disabilities. And we are partnering with the DC Special Education Co-op to launch their response to intervention initiative, which will include online interactive trainings and a community of practice. If you're interested in, and if you work at a charter school and are interested in this response to intervention initiative, please reach out to the DC Special Education Co-op or to me, and I will put you in touch with them. Now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Now I can talk. I'm unmuted. I am Sarah Sandelius. I'm the founder of the Ability Challenge. I have a second screen up, so if I'm looking to the side, that's why. I'm going to continue to bug everybody about turning their screens on. We don't care if you have kids in the room or you're eating or you're wearing exercise clothes. We don't care. It's Friday. Okay, so who am I? I am Sarah, and my background is that I started my experiences in education as an attorney. I worked for many years in New York City, most of which was in the New York City Department of Education, working for the alternative school district and then working in their legal office. And in 2016, a week before the election, I moved myself back down to Washington, which is where I'm from, and started consulting, seeing similar challenges across the New York City context and the DC City context around the implementation of really high quality programming for students with disabilities led me to start the Ability Challenge in 2018. And our goal is to transform how schools offer programming and services to diverse learners. So what we do is we focus on collaboration across the teachers, parents, and students as a key driver for special education improvement. So you'll see that's the overlap between Jenna and I, is that we are firm believers in the power of collaboration as a method of improvement. We have 3 prongs of our work. We have what we call impact training, which is a series of modules that are delivered online or in cohorts that help build collaboration across school teams with an eye towards those high leverage opportunities that really help students grow and help deliver tailored instruction to students based on their needs. We also have a tech component called Hopper, which is a web application that helps build the habits of effective collaboration. And we also do customized consulting for schools. And finally, our impact. I think we're all here today because we care about the education that our young people are receiving. And really where the Ability Challenge is trying to leverage an impact is around working with schools to help understand the needs of diverse learners, and then to help educators offer high quality learning environments for diverse learners. And finally, to maximize growth and potential for all students. So we are going to ask you all to introduce yourselves, hence the harassment about the video cameras, except for anyone whose video camera is broken. So I am gonna pass it to the next person to introduce themselves. It'd be great to have your name, your school or organization, role, the length in education, and what brings you to this session. And I'm just gonna call on someone, and hopefully if you don't have a microphone functionality, you can introduce yourself in the chat. But otherwise, we want to hear from everyone because it's really important for us to know who's here and what you guys are interested in learning about. So I'm gonna ask Christopher to go first, since he was the first one to put on his camera. Thank you.
Sure. So hi, Jenna, how are you? So I'm Christopher Nace. I'm with DC International School. I'm their new Director of Student Support Services, which is exciting. This is my 9th year in education, and I was coming to the session for 2 reasons. One, I knew Jenna, and Sarah, I've heard your name from Justin so many times. So I was curious just because I have heard and knew both of you. And then the second thing is I want to learn more about data systems driving supports for students with disabilities, especially during this distance learning time. I feel like everything I've ever learned in my educational experience has gone out the window and trying new things. So any information is good information.
So can you just pick somebody and
Sure.
kick it to them to do an intro?
Sure, I will kick it to Letitia because you're the next one I see.
Hi, my name is Letitia Kennard. I work for DCPS. Like Sarah, I am from New York. I worked in the New York City Department of Education, and I got started because my son has special needs. The job title that I have is that I am a specialist for the related services. So we analyze the data regarding specialized education and related services for the population in DCPS. I came to this conference because, like everyone else, I am very concerned about special education in a COVID environment and how services are going to be pushed out and how we could use data to better drive the services and get the students what they need. And let's see, who am I going to pass it to? Oh, Stacy, the lovely lady in workout clothes. And I'm sorry, but my camera is off because I have like 900 situations in my home.
Yeah, we'll just go with this is what I get for walking and then jumping on. So it's all good. I am Stacy Hall. I am with Stargate Charter School in a suburb just north of Denver, Colorado. I am the K-12 Director of Special Populations. So in our unique organizational structure, I'm part of the academic admin team servicing almost 1,600 kids and 180 employees in some way, shape, or form. In my role with a school full of gifted learners, I do the GT, MTSS, 504 special education and ELL. So yeah, essentially I touch every learner and every staff member. It was a brand new position in the school. I've lived it for a year. I was super excited about August coming, and now I'm really not, because there's just so many unknowns, and how do we take care of all of our learners and our staff in this unique environment? I've been in many roles in education over about 26 years. And I was excited about this opportunity. We had a special education program audit done last year at our school. It became very clear our school needed better systems in place to have some data-driven decision-making, not just opinions and parent input, but really based on data. And I'm pretty good at it, but I know I can always learn more and network with others that are also doing it well. Oh yeah, I need to pick someone. Let's go with Amanda.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda. I work at LAM PCS here in DC, and my position is a student support team and ELL coordinator. The reason why I'm attending this is just to learn how to navigate the new situation as everyone. And also, I would like to know how to better collaborate with the special education team and help. Our particular situation is that we are over-identifying some ELL students as special ed. So I want to try to figure out how to avoid that and figure out how to better serve them. And I'm going to go with, let me see, Jessica.
Hi, everyone. So I am the special education coordinator at a new school that is just opening up. So the name of the school is the Sojourner Truth School. It's a public charter school, and I was really excited to open a school and be part of a founding team, but now I feel like, oh my God, we're opening a school and we may not be in person. So it's a lot right now. I'm pretty good with data, but it's just, you know, the component of at-home learning that's just really nerve-wracking, because what is data going to look like? And we're like the pioneers of that now. So I am excited for it and just trying to see what else is available to us. Yeah, so that's what brings me to this session. Sorry, I'm answering them in different orders. And length in education, I'm going into my 8th year of in education. I taught for 7 years, special education, 7th grade, 5 years, a year in 9th grade and a year in 10th grade, from New York. And I'm actually back home right now with my mom, but I teach in DC, live in DC. Oh, and I gotta pick someone. Ashok. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong.
I just unmute myself. Hi, my name is Ashok Oli. I'm the founder of the Ed Intelligence. It's a new student information management system that we have been working for the last 3 years with a goal to pull all the data from various sources. That includes the Google Classroom, attendance, enrollment, and all other assessment data like NWEA, whatever you wanted, right? We want to build we have built a system that lets you pull all the information and generates a report with few clicks. So our motto is click, 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 get everything you need. So we have the solution, and then that's where we still are kind of building more, integrating more features into our software and kind of understand what's happening in the special need world. So all the communication we have and all information we collect, we're trying to integrate that into the system so that we can help the schools better, and so that data analysts and the schools can focus on what they do the best. So I'm here to learn more about what is happening on the special need world. That's all. Thanks. Oh, I need to pick someone. I don't know. So I don't know who's left. Is it Erin?
Sure. My name is Erin Tarpley. I am the Academic Support Coordinator with LAYC Career Academy here in DC. And I've been in education for about 6 years, although I just completed my first year in the DC area. What brings me here today is just to gain some extra insight, especially with the way that things are changing so rapidly. And then Queen is the next name I see on the list.
Hi, I'll come on video for this. Hi all, I am with the DC Charter School Alliance. I'm just assisting today with facilitating this conversation with the chat. And so happy to be here. I'm really excited to learn more about this space as an observer. And at the Alliance, I do the policy and advocacy work. So nice to meet you all. And I'm going to go with Preeti, my colleague.
Hi, you've all probably gotten a lot of emails from me. I'm Preeti Patadar. I work at the DC Charter School Alliance. I am the Associate Director of Policy and Programs. I try to read all the questions. Length in education. Can't even count the years. So I would say it's at least been 10. So 10 years. And I'm at this session because, you know, I'm here to support and excited to hear a little bit more from Sarah and Jenna. I have to fix one. Let's go with Kelly. Where's Kelly's sound?
Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Scholl. I am a data analysis manager at Aussie. I've been in education for about 7 years. I started developing health curriculum in Guatemala, so I've done all sorts of different things. I'm really excited to be part of this session because part of my portfolio at Aussie is supporting on the special education reporting work, and we're definitely in a place where we're trying to move beyond compliance into really promoting best practices. And so I'm interested in hearing more about or supporting the best practices that many of our LEAs is already doing. And so I'm interested in hearing about how people are using data, how they would like to be using data, and what obstacles they face in using data in this setting, just so that I think it makes me better at my job, that we can be more responsive, especially in this new world that we're a part of. And have we heard from Marlinda yet? Marlinda Boxley?
Hi everyone. Just wanted to let you know that my video is not working, but I'm so happy to be here. I am originally from DC, a graduate of District of Columbia Public Schools. Glad to be back in my community and making a difference and leading change. I have worked in K through 12 in higher ed, and ironically, my higher ed experience includes being an administrator for Distance Ed University. So we're just calling upon those resources and experiences to improve our distance ed services. I'm currently working at a charter school, Mary McLeod Bethune Day Academy, and prior to that, worked in a consulting practice that provided services to K through 12 and higher ed institutions. And I've worked in large urban school districts where I've been a central office administrator and a school-based administrator. So schools for me is where the action is and where my passion is. So I'm here so that we can take some best practices and build capacity with the SPED team at the charter school where I support.
Thank you. Can you pass it to someone else? We have Every, Miranda, and I think Elaine who haven't gone.
Sure, I'll pass it to Elaine.
Hi. So I was moving around until all locations finally sat down so I can turn my video on. I am Elaine Ho. I am an instructional guide and coach at Two Rivers Public Charter School. I'm a founding member of that school, so I was started out as a teacher. I've been in education since 2004, so 16 years as teacher, principal, and currently instructional guide. We have a co-teaching model where general ed and sped teachers teach in the same classroom in target grades. And so as we think about what we're calling remote learning 3.0 at Two Rivers, how do we really ensure that co-teaching is effective in an online environment? I think some of the same things that we still needed to improve on in co-teaching in person are the same things that we need to improve in online, but then there's that added online challenge and opportunity. Also really interested in how folks are thinking about assessment. I think with the equity piece, we're thinking a lot about how do we give our students, especially students of color, varied ways to show their brilliance and show what they can do and what they understand. So would love to kind of get ideas for types of data and how to support teams to look at that data effectively so that they can manage co-teaching in a way that results in equitable outcomes for our kids. I'm looking through Everin.
Yep, correct. Hello, I'm Everin Kulha. I'm with Harmony DC Public Charter School. I'm the school principal. So okay. I'm the school principal. So our SPED coordinator is in vacation, so I should be here for him. So this is my 14th year in education. So basically we have some improvement plans for SPED's teaching in our school. So we've seen that our SPED students are not improving as much as our regular ed students. So that's why we just want to try to find ways to improve our quality of education in the school. And especially now we have distance learning, and we've seen there were a lot of challenges to deliver those, special education hours to our students. I want to learn from everyone how they did it, and if you have any ideas, this team has any ideas, obviously I'd like to learn about that. Thank you for this session. Next, the only person is, let me see, who is in Miranda, I guess?
Hi, I'm Miranda. I don't have video capability on the device I'm on, but I've been in education for 5 years, and then I went back to grad school. I'm a PhD candidate at Teachers College, but in the summer I work at a school that works with kids who have a variety of learning styles. And so I would like to learn more about how to be able to work with them effectively.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. This was fantastic, and we really appreciate you taking the time to introduce yourselves. It helps both us and you guys get to know who we are as a special education community, and I heard a lot of common themes. Concerns about how are we going to do this virtually? How do we get people using, and by people I mean our teachers, not just our SPED teachers, but also our general education teachers and our other staff members, using that data to support our special education students? And how do we make sure there isn't over-identification of students? So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Sarah, who's going to talk briefly about the current state of data in the US.
All right, well, we might not get through the entire current state of data, but we're going to talk a little bit about what we've gathered in terms of use of data around special education, and really focus on the context setting for why this presentation. So in 2018, when I founded the Ability Challenge, I ran a study of educators across the country. And I really was looking to see, I know there's a lot of data being collected, but I wanted to see what data was actually being used. And my specific intention was what data is being used for special education purposes. Because I was thinking, if I'm gonna have an organization focused on special ed improvement, I needed to know what the landscape was. So we ran this survey. We got over 800 responses, but 527 that we considered qualified from 42 states and DC. We've published all of our results in a white paper that's on our website, and the link is in there if you want to read a lot of data, which given this audience, you may actually be excited about that. All right. So I just want to ground our conversation as we move into the special ed data pieces more generally. What we did in the study was we separated data into two categories. There was general data and then special education data. And so general data, we sort of considered everything that people collect or schools collect for every student. Attendance, growth, scores, things like that. And then the special education data was just the data that's collected pursuant to IDEA. So, progress monitoring, compliance data, those kinds of things. And when it came to looking at the general data collection trends, what we saw was that lots of schools are collecting data, which is what we knew, and lots of schools are analyzing data. So you can see on this chart, 89% are collecting attendance data and 79% are analyzing it. Then if you go into the general data types and who's actually using it with the subgroup of students with disabilities, so that's again different than special ed data that's collected only in pursuant of IDEA. Here, this chart, we're talking about data that is being collected as a general data population and analyzed for students with disabilities. You can see a huge gap. The first top of that chart shows the pink is that analyzes all that we saw in the last chart. So for attendance data, that's 79% of our respondents said they are analyzing attendance data for all students. And only 22%, which is that orange square, are analyzing it for the subpopulation of students with disabilities. So as you can see by that blue bar, that's a 57% gap. A similarly large gap for academic growth data. When you take all of that data collection and you sort of wrap it up into figuring out what the trends are, what came out, which may or may not surprise you, is that there's a disconnect between the data that is being collected for special education and being used for special education purposes, and then what actually schools and school folks are feeling are important for improvement of special education. And so what this chart shows is that the data that's most used for special education programming are compliance data, and then third is academic growth data, which is good. But that the key drivers for improvement are positive school culture, staff collaboration, and parent involvement. So that really led us to think, like, why is there this disconnect? And how can we help schools build better measures and better systems for collecting data that actually leads to improvement? We overlay this on top of other studies, and we see that there's this area of just general teacher preparedness and efficacy. This is a study by understood.org, which is a phenomenal study if you guys are looking for teacher survey information. But basically what these three charts show is that overwhelmingly teachers don't feel prepared to teach students with disabilities in their classrooms, which is really stark when you think about the movement towards more inclusive settings and the fact that most students with disabilities are learning most of their time in a gen ed setting. So put this on top of COVID, and we have a situation where some of our students who need the most supports are actually getting the fewest supports through remote learning. And so what we want to do today is talk more about how to use special education data to make programming decisions in the classroom. And we put these three bullets as just sort of a general set of principles. We're hoping that educators will review all existing data to identify overall student needs. They'll collect new data to understand where students are now or in September, and then they'll work with their peers to develop tailored plans for moving forward. So that's the overview. I'm gonna hand it back to Jenna unless we have any questions.
No? All right. So we are going, Sarah and I had the next couple of steps laid out, and it was this lovely interactive conversation and presentation. And then as we were listening to what you all were hoping to get out of this presentation, we've decided to pivot a little. The same way every good teacher in the middle of the classroom realizes that she thinks her class is going this way, and in fact, they're going that way. That's what we're gonna do. The next 5, 6, 7, 8 slides, we're supposed to talk about, in a fair amount of depth, the type of data that you see on the screen. Formal evaluations, psych ed, speech, OT evaluations, an IEP, an individual education program, a functional behavioral assessment, and a vocational assessment. And what I'm going to do instead is just talk about how it ties directly to a student. We're then going to talk about 3 types of classroom data that you are definitely collecting no matter what. And then we're going to leave time to break out into groups to have you all work through a tool that we created, that the goal of which is to bring together special educators, both the teachers and the administrators, and the general educators. Again, this teachers and the administrators together to think about how to do planning and programming for your classroom, thinking about the special education student, knowing that when you put plans in place, when you put supports in place for special education students, it benefits all students, including your EL students, including your low students who are on RTI, and your general education students. So to dive in, we're going to talk about Alejandra. This is Alejandra. She is a 5th grade student with multiple disabilities. She was diagnosed in 3rd grade with a specific learning disability and ADHD. She attends a local public charter school here in DC. She loves swimming and soccer and hanging out with her friends. And she thinks she wants to be an artist when she grows up, but she has a backup plan to pursue nursing. Now, I just want to put the caveat on, Sarah and I have practiced, and she knows exactly when to hit that button to move to the next slide when we were doing the presentation the way we thought we would. So if we're a second or 2 off, or I'm giving her a note, exactly, that's what's going on. Just to review, formal assessments are completed by trained professionals. They are systematic data-based tests that are used to determine a student's grade level and functioning level. They're used to evaluate overall capabilities in the specific area. It has data that is used to diagnose disabilities and determine if the student meets criteria for special education classifications. And it has data that's used to create initial IEP goals. It relates to Alejandra because she had formal assessments in 3rd grade after having gone through RTI when her team suspected that she might have disabilities. She will then have these formal assessments again every 3 years as part of her triennial evaluation. So every 3 years, her team has to determine if she is eligible. I do want to pause and make a note. You're going to hear me talk about different special education requirements, how you can use different evaluations for different areas. I want to note this is very DC specific. If you have worked in a state, you worked in a state because we're not a state, you may hear me say things and be like, no, that's wrong. I want to acknowledge ahead of time that we do some things in the DC world that is a little different than say in New York. And also, as Sarah said in the chat, if I use a term that you need some explanation or describing or whatever, throw it in. Sarah will help everybody else. Chris, I know, knows all of this, so I'm gonna shout him out. But my other SPED coordinators, SPED managers, SPED directors help each other out. Okay. Psych ed, as we know, are used to diagnose learning disabilities. In the case of emotional disorders, attention deficit disorders, and developmental delays, at least in DC. And in the case of Alejandra, It was used to diagnose her learning disability. She has a reading comprehension disorder and ADHD inattentive. Next slide. Speech language evaluations, which are used to diagnose speech language impairments. Alejandra had one done at her initial evaluation in 3rd grade. It was found that she's not eligible for the speech language impairment classification, nor does she require speech language therapy. Moving right along, OT. I am going to spend a moment on OT because unlike the other types of formal evaluations, an OT evaluation cannot be used to determine if a child, solely determine if a child requires special education services. You will also need at least a psych ed, or depending on your LEA, a speech language evaluation. There is a relatively new diagnosis called sensory integration disorder, and that is made through an OT eval, but it is not an IDEA classification. If your parent comes to you with a sensory integration disorder diagnosis, there are ways to work through it through OHI. I've seen a school or two do SLD. I'm happy to talk through that with you, either in the chat or in another conversation, but I wanted to throw that out. In Alejandra's case, the OT evaluation helped to confirm the ADHD diagnosis, that she would benefit from OT to work on organization, to work on impulsivity, and some sensory motor pieces. Okay, next slide. IEPs. We all know that IEPs are legal documents that outline the supports and services that a student with disabilities require. Alejandra does have an IEP. This is her 3rd year with one. It's written by her special education teacher, her related service, her occupational therapist, and as you'll see, she has a BIP, a behavior implementation plan, a behavior improvement plan. So the school behavior support specialist has written that to work on some of her impulsivity in the classroom. I do want to note that IEPs have many, 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 many parts, as those of us that have written them know. But there are only really 3 sections that are in every single IEP that deal with data. The PLOP or the PLAP, the present level of performance. Sometimes they're called the present level of academic achievement performance, depending on what state you're in. The goals and the progress report. Goals, we know, are the meat of an IEP. It identifies where students receive systematic specialized instruction or therapy. And it's important because it includes how progress will be measured. What data will be collected to show if the interventions are working. That data is then reported upon in the progress report, which comes out, depending on your school system, quarterly or triannually, so that the entire team and parents can observe and monitor Alejandra's progress. We're going to talk a little bit about how it's important to use progress reports and data from goals with classroom data, with grades. If the 2 aren't matching, one, she's doing well in one and not in the other, that's something we need to talk about. So next, we're going to touch upon an FBA and BIP. An FBA, a functional behavioral analysis, is used to determine if a student requires a BIP. I'm going to spend some time in this because this is very important to Sarah and I. We both feel in special education that the next part doesn't get enough attention by special educators and definitely by general educators. Behavior is communication. Behavior, all behavior is telling us something. An FBA looks at what is the student communicating? What is the student telling us with their behavior? If you need to do an FBA and decide if there's a BIP, you need to figure out what is the student trying to tell us. They're not trying to be bad. They're not trying to piss off that teacher every day. There's something going on that they don't have the language to tell us, and they're using their behavior. So it is vital to do a strong, thorough, focused FBA to determine what's going on. If you are in DC and you feel that your school needs further supports in their FBA areas, let me know. I can support you with that. I also have other people that I can connect you with, but it's so important because I'm just going to give you a quick example. I'm working with a student who recently graduated from Maya Angelou Public Charter School. And this was a student who had bounced around from schools, charter school to charter school to charter school because of behavior problems. And he got to this school and he said, "Miss you, I don't know what they did, but they looked at how I was acting and they figured out how to help me." And I knew he was telling me someone did a really good FBA and created a BIP and taught him how to manage his behavior. And he now has had a summer job. He now has a bank account with money in it. He now has formal ID and he has plans for the fall. The plans are shifted a little bit because of COVID, but nonetheless, he has plans. So I just want to emphasize how important a strong FBA that looks at frequency and duration, location, who is involved, the antecedent, what happens right before the behavior, and the consequence. My SPED people know the A, B's, and C's of behavior, and other factors such as academic demands, academic and behavioral expectations in classroom environment, why it's so important. Last, with the vocational assessments, within the formal assessments are vocational assessments. They are used to help students create goals for life after they graduate from high school, whether that's with a high school diploma or with a certificate when they age out. It has to be done by the time a student turns 14, not ninth grade as a lot of people think, but 14. So if a student is in 7th or 8th grade when they turn 14, their middle school must complete a transition plan made up of vocational assessments. It's important to note that a transition plan does not cover a student moving from elementary to middle or middle to high school, although that's a really good idea. It does not cover in the time we're dealing with moving from distance learning to virtual learning to in-house learning and all the different models we're dealing with. It only deals with what happens once a student leaves high school and is no longer receiving special education services. So that's vocational assessments. I want to take a moment to pause. Does anybody have any questions? I know I went through those fast. If anybody has any questions about the formal assessments that I touched upon or anything that they want to add, anything I missed, please jump right in. No? Okay.
I'm going to ask you guys a question. Make sure you're all still there. I'm curious. So most of you said you wanted to talk about how to do this in COVID world. So I'm curious if anyone can talk a little bit about how they're using assessments or maybe even how they're collecting assessment data, given the challenges around actually not being in person.
Well, I'll go first. My school, we're going to start administering devices for students, and then they can start logging on to take their math assessments, which are through, I'm forgetting the software right now, but it's an online software they can log on. So that's how we're collecting our baseline data. What I'm now looking into is how do I have a parent who wants her child to be assessed. So I'm trying to see if we can do it in person or if I should do the Woodcock-Johnson in person, if it's something that I can do online. I know I can use any academic assessment to gather data, but when it's a new student that I have no idea on, I have to just look at the data that's already been collected. the way I like to administer is establishing a rapport and getting to know the student, and then seeing like, okay, your test results are this because of whatever was happening, or I know you're capable of this. So I'm really just trying to come around, how do I do this now in a virtual setting? And what is the best approach to doing it in a virtual setting where you are getting that student to be engaged and giving your all, and not just clicking through something because they're home or in an environment that's not offering them that setting they need to be able to give their all.
This sounds a little silly, but have you gotten a chance to just sit and chat and hang out with the student and get to know them and ask them?
So I'm in the process of doing that, and again, it comes down to we're teaching people how to, you know, connect virtually. Like I had a kid answer 3 questions, and I'm like, I know I don't want this to feel like an interview, but can you give me a little more? I know we're strangers, but I really do want to get to know you. So it's like, how much do you pull? How much do you give?
Yeah.
With
the program that I'm doing this summer, we had to do a little bit of assessment, and we made a point of before even scheduling the assessment days, we brought the kids in groups of 3 and 4, and we did virtual Pictionary. We did the life and death of a snail, where you draw, I don't know if people know this story, but you draw a snail on the whiteboard feature using Zoom, and one team has to draw something about how the snail is living, and then the next team has to take that picture and then turn it how the snail is dying, and then the team has to go back and turn how the snail is living. And it sounds morbid and horrible, but turns into this, you have to do it with like middle and high schoolers, can't do it with little kids. But it turns into this crazy story. But what it did was it built rapport with them and me where I wasn't the assessor. And it also let us get to know each other. And I've opened a school before, and I cannot, as the SPED person, I cannot imagine doing this virtually. And I know you are not sleeping and you don't have a lot of time, and I just added one more thing to your list. But I'm just trying to throw out some ideas there. Does anybody else have any other ideas?
Thank you.
No?
Okay. I mean, I think this is going to be, in terms of like special ed data, but also just in terms of all instruction, this is going to be one of the hardest things in the fall, right? Because at least in the spring, students, new teachers, and teachers, new students. And now we're going to talk about, unless you're doing something like looping, you're talking about getting to know a whole new set of kids and developing that relationship. And I think that's going to be, that's, you know, one of the things that's probably going to be most challenging. Has anyone like developed any plans for how they're going to address this? And now we have the snail game.
And Pictionary. Pictionary works surprisingly well online. There's also Kahoots or Jackbox.
Well, just something to think about, you know, maybe that's something that like groups of teachers can get together and come up with some of these different kinds of ideas. Or maybe we can even start a group after this to, you know, to share, because that's the work, that's the hard stuff.
All right, so we're going to move on then to connecting with classroom data. I just want to briefly note, as we all know, classroom data should be used throughout the special education process, from eligibility to IEP implementation. The types of classroom data we're going to look at includes attendance, grades, and behavior. And this is the key time when the SPED professionals and your gen ed professionals need to come together and look at data together. Let's be honest, we all know that as SPED educators, our general education colleagues don't always understand the evaluations. They don't always understand how to read IEPs. But classroom data, are things they understand, and helping them connect it to special education data is a great way to support inclusion. So let's talk about attendance, which is the next slide, Sarah. Thank you. This is going to be where you talked about that interactive part. I want everyone to think about, if a student meets the criteria for special education based on formal assessments, we've got the data to show that Alejandra is eligible for special education. She's got a disability. But what if she has really poor attendance? What if she misses 3, 4, 5 days a month? How do we know if her disability is a disability or due to lack of appropriate education? Something to think about. If a student has poor attendance, how does that impact their progress towards the mastery of their goals? How can they make progress if they're not there to receive the legal services that the team has determined they need? If a student has poor attendance but is mastering their goals, that's a whole other concern. Where is that disconnect? How are they making that progress without getting the services people are required, the team determined she was required to receive? I want to take a moment and pause and let anyone jump in. Have you come up with these ideas? Do you know how to, have you faced these situations? How have you dealt with them?
A number of years ago, when I was serving as a middle school special education teacher, we actually did not qualify a student because of his poor school attendance. But then it became a whole, and it was all along, it wasn't an if then, but all the way along, the conversation was about what is the barrier to his attendance to make sure we were addressing those concerns. And thankfully, the student was making pretty good progress in spite of what was a lack of instruction, especially in reading, because he just wasn't coming to school, and it had been that way for 2 or 3 years. And it came down to he was literally scared to leave his mom. So we put some modifications in place around length of school day and kind of scaffolded him from like, come for an hour, come for 2 hours, your mom's going to be okay. Because he was really scared his mom was going to get sick if he left the house. So more to the conversation, but I really like how you also brought up, like, if a student is making progress but they're not coming to school, how is that and why is that, and were they accurately identified to begin with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not something you're going to see often, but every now and then, if you've been doing this long enough, I've been in SPED for 20 years, you come across it every couple of years, and you're like, how? I don't know. And then you have to look at the LRE, the least restrictive environment. Does the student need all the services that they're receiving on their IEP? Or are there other ways to support them? Thank you, appreciate that. Let's go ahead and next look at grades. This is a huge one, especially when connecting our general education and special education teams. Do the grades match the progress towards mastery of the IEP goals? If a student has strong grades in an area of need, but is not displaying the growth towards the mastery of IEP goals, where is the disconnect? So in Alejandra's case, if she has reading comprehension goals, but according to her teachers, she's doing great in reading comprehension, what's going on there? Or vice versa. If she is making progress towards mastery of her IEP goals and comprehension, but she's struggling in the classroom, how do we help her transfer and generalize the skills that she's learning on her goals? If a student's making progress when the special education teacher is present, but not otherwise, the team needs to look at a number of things, including, are all the accommodations and modifications being provided? Is Alejandra receiving all the support she's supposed to be receiving in all classes, not just when the special education teacher is here, is there. I'd love to hear how you as special educators and special education administrators make sure that your general education teachers know what goals their special education students have, and how, A, how they're being worked on, and B, how the accommodations are being provided. Does anybody have anything that they're willing to share?
So prior to my role as an SST coordinator, I was actually a special education teacher. And what I found was very helpful was meeting with the teachers once a week and just touching base. And a lot of times before I even started talking about what I needed to talk about or about their goals, like I would say, okay, what are you working on? And kind of lay out the floor to them so they can speak about what they are doing. And that way I get the perspective instead of simply saying you need to do this, this, and this, because I feel like they kind of close off if you just give them instructions. So I feel like a lot of times if you let them talk, then that really helps for them to, by themselves, really critically think about what they need to do to help the student reach those goals.
Great, thank you, Amanda. Anyone else? Does anybody have an IEP at a glance that they love, that they'd be willing to talk about?
I don't know that I'm in love with it, but it works well for our direct service providers. I'm in a setting where we use a program called Enrich, and there is a built-in snapshot. So literally at the click of a button, either at the beginning of the year or as changes are made at annuals or initials or reevaluations, the case managers can click a button, print it, or PDF save it and get it to those who have direct interaction with the students. And it does list out the accommodations and goals, which is important. I wish it listed more of student input and strengths.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, let's look at the last piece of data that we're going to talk about connecting with the classroom. And this is, I told you Sarah and I were big on behavior. We're going to talk about behavior data again. What a strong school system, a strong LEA is collecting behavior data, both positive and other behavior data. And so you need to look at a student and wonder, does the behavior always occur at a specific time of day or in a specific class? Are you using your school's SISs, school information systems, SISs, whatever your school calls it, such as Dean List or PowerSchool or all of those, to see if the students are always having a hard time, I don't know, maybe right before lunch or before PE, or historically year after year after year, right before Thanksgiving, things like that. If the behavior is only occurring in specific classes, what is the student trying to communicate with you? Does the instruction need to be differentiated? Is the student struggling to avoid this area or this class and using behavior to avoid adults realizing that they need support in that area? Is something going on at home and the school doesn't know and the student's using the behavior to tell you? If your general education teachers and your special education teachers and then your deans or your assistant principals or whomever is in charge of your behavior don't have time to connect, don't have collaborative planning time to talk about this with students, about those students, how are you fully supporting your student in a holistic way? Are you fully supporting your student in a holistic way? Can you fully support your student in a holistic way? And I challenge you, and I acknowledge this is a really difficult challenge, and I've done it, and I've been shot down, and I've had to go back, and I've had to fight for it. If you know your school isn't doing this well enough, start speaking up, be that voice. Talk about how if we address the behavior, it will help improve our scores. Because we all know it comes down to the scores and the attendance and all the different, the PMF goals and all of that. Work with your administrators to see how collecting behavior data and implementing PBIS, positive behavior intervention systems, can improve learning outcomes for all students. And we have to look at it differently now. You're going to have behaviors still while we do virtual learning. They're just going to be different behaviors. I mean, anything from, as I've been teaching and running this program this summer, it can be a lot of this, where you know the kid's there, but you say something to them and they don't like it, and they just turn off their camera, and you sit there and turn your camera on, turn your camera on, turn your camera on, and there's nothing you can do. Or, and I can't interact this, but you've got two kids, you know, that they start going at each other, and all of a sudden you mute them. And what is that doing? But how are you going to handle different virtual situations? Different virtual behaviors that come up. Something else I challenge you, and then I want to take a moment to talk about this, is how are you ensuring that your students are getting social time together virtually? Because we know that social connection improves performance in the classroom. We know that, I don't know about you all, I've been stuck inside this apartment for how many months now? And all I want to do is meet with Sarah in person and not through our virtual Zoom sessions. All I want to do is go hang out at a restaurant on a Friday afternoon and have a glass of wine. And I'm an adult and I understand what's going on, and I theoretically most of the time can regulate and control my behavior and emotions. I also know that I do better when I have my standing Friday night and Sunday morning connections with two different groups of friends, because I'm getting that social interaction. So how are you as administrators, as teachers, making sure your school is providing that social time where you're not learning, you're just hanging out for your students? Anybody want to share how they did that in the spring, or what they have set up ready for the fall? The show and tell. I saw quickly someone had put in about show and tell, and that is brilliant. And by the way, high school seniors love show and tell, not just the pre-K 3ers, and I can prove that. I'm trying to look back to see who it was.
It was me.
That's
So in the role I'm in, I wasn't an active participant in any of this, but I know we got our student council involved, especially at the middle school and high school level, where it was student-driven student activities. So there was some bingo playing. There were some virtual dance parties, like just putting on the music and letting it go. I think there were a number of other games as well. Just kind of like the kid part of after hours or after school. Tried to do some club activities online as much as they could. They continued with Battle of the Books. So there were some connections outside of the academic pieces of literacy.
Yeah. The program that I'm managing this summer, so again, it was weird. We brought kids in from all over the city. Nobody knew each other. And one of the first activities we did was a scavenger hunt. And we put the kids in teams, and everyone had a list, and you had to get as many things, each team had to get as many things on the list. And it was everything from a red shoe to a shirt from a college or high school, to a bag of chips, to $1, to your Metro card, to things that you might have and you might not have. They made fun of me. I keep a bag of Trader Joe's smoked salt almonds on my office, because that's just what I munch all day, and I don't keep chips in the house. And it was a great connector. They all just made fun of me because I was fighting for my almonds to be counted as chips. And the teacher and the rest of them were like, you are not getting your chips. But it brought everyone together. So that virtual scavenger hunt can be done for any wide range. With my seniors in high school, we did show and tell, and we got looks. And one of them brought a big wad of money. And he's like, I mowed lawns and I earned this money. All right, there you go. So that's another idea. What have you guys been doing with your students, or what are you planning to do with your students? Anyone?
So I wrote in the chat, I know of a teacher who did 8 p.m. trivia night every single night in the spring. He opened it up and he just said, I'm here. It was a middle school and I'm doing the trivia night and whoever wants to come can come. And it was a friend of mine's kid who would participate in it. And for her, it was like that consistency of knowing that he was always there. And she had this built-in opportunity to socialize with kids in her grade, even if it wasn't like, she didn't have to actually corral people, like it was just there. And that was like a really important piece of sort of making a routine for her in the spring. And I thought that was just really amazing, and good for him for doing it every single night.
A lot. Okay. Oh, I like the talent show idea, Amanda. That's fantastic.
I have one other story, which is that since it's a Friday afternoon, my daughter is 5 and she had a show and tell that happened every week. And one kid brought his remote control and you just see his mom mortified in the back. Like, oh my God, like showing everyone how much like screen time he's had, and all the other parents, like, you know, it was just one of those moments. I will never forget that. Because it could have been so easily been my daughter saying like, my remote, my most prized possession right now.
So Amanda asked about trivia games. I just want to do a shout out to Kahoots, which is free for educators. They have trivia games on you pick a topic and they've got it. And then you can also make your own online games. I know Kelly's colleague, Jennifer Carpenter at Aussie, she introduced me to Kahoots. She's a big fan of them and uses them in her presentations. There are, Kahoots can be academic, but it's also fun. I know there's a Star Wars one. My niece and nephew are very into the Disney everything. And there's one for every Disney princess you could imagine. There's one on Disney princesses as leaders. So you can like empower that piece, but you can go nuts. And Kahoots is doing free accounts for educators with educator emails. So use that as a resource. So what we're gonna do next is, we promised you all an activity using a tool. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. Our numbers are down to a manageable group where instead of putting you into breakout rooms, we can do it together. If everyone would, once Sarah's done explaining it, put your camera on for those at work, but definitely unmute yourself because this is an interactive piece. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
I know that is very small. You don't need to read it. You're going to get a version of this. But so we put together a planning tool, and when ABC works with some of our clients, we have this tool that we use. And so what we've done is we've given you a piece of it that will help us have this conversation here. But I'm more than happy to share the rest of it if you want to engage in that conversation. So basically, the tool has a whole bunch of guiding questions that talks through how you would modify instruction given some of the main considerations for students with disabilities in the classroom. And it's mostly for planning. So I'm going to walk through an example and then I'll give you guys a link to the tool. We're also going to give you a link to Alejandra's pseudo IEP. It's just a bunch of notes with her data. And then what we were hoping to do was try to complete the tool looking at what we might do if we were educationally planning for Alejandra. And I think that this would be the opportunity more to talk a little bit more about how we do this in remote. settings. So here's the example. A 9th grade math teacher wants to prepare for a co-planning session with the resource teacher who pushes into her class. Because the school building is closed due to COVID-19, she needs to be thoughtful about using data about the students in her class to plan. So she uses this tool and she goes in, and these first four columns here are actually part of the tool. So it talks about what category, whether it's a classroom or an individualized planning activity. It talks about the topic. So what is the main topic for the guiding question? The guiding question is really that piece around helping you figure out what to plan. So in this case, the question is, what adjustments should be made to the physical environment to help all students stay on task? Because this teacher is trying to co-plan for the whole class. In Alejandra's case, you'll see the questions are much more geared towards planning for individual students. And then it provides some examples. So in this case, the examples are adjusting classroom setup. Clearly, that doesn't really apply right now, but potentially thinking about how your virtual classroom appears and how it's accessed by students. Strategic placement of student materials, again, thinking through that clean and clear way of making sure that kids know that they have the stuff that they need. And then potentially a creation of a calm down space. Again, very much a physical environment classroom consideration, but also could be actually taught through virtual if you wanted to sort of go there with talking about what spaces provide calmness for kids. If they have that, and if they don't, then that's something that needs to be thought about and planned for. So the yellow ones are the ones that you fill in. So here we have the response to the guiding question. And here this teacher has written, because we're using Zoom, we need to make sure we help the students understand how to create learning environments in their home. So she's thinking about how she's gonna set the kids up for success with their physical space by explicitly teaching why it's important to have a clean space and a clear space for learning. She's going to use classroom observations. She's also going to use some of the data that she collected from her spring remote learning to help, figure out what worked and what didn't work and what she might do. And then action steps. So this is where she writes down what she's going to do next. Here, she's going to create a lesson about setting, and she's going to ask students to journal about one important way they can make their setting more helpful to their learning. She didn't say, I'm going to ask people to show me their setting, because that could be a tricky thing for some students. But she gave them some choice to talk or to write about or to draw about, something that makes them feel comfortable in their learning environment. All right, so now we're going to get to Alejandra. How are we feeling? Are we ready to do an activity? That is an overwhelmingly excited group of people. All right, so you are a 5th grade ELA teacher, and we're in week 4 of the school year. As you plan to deliver content for the week, you want to be sure it's differentiated to meet the needs of all students, but especially Alejandra. You are planning to deliver content through virtual live instruction. So what I am going to do now is I'm actually going to stop the share, and I'm going to put us in the actual tool. Jenna, I'm going off the plan here.
Go for it.
If I can actually get out of that. And then we can just sort of walk through the tool together.
Do you want me to put the links to the tool and to Alejandra's background in the chat?
That would be fantastic, yes.
Okay. If everyone gives me 1 sec.
All right.
There's one. So what I just put in is the link to the tool. We've also created obviously we couldn't give you an IEP. So I made a spreadsheet of a mock IEP that has some background information, her services, her goals, her BIP, and her BIP data.
So rather, in the interest of time, I think we can use the information that that Jenna talked about with respect to Alejandra, and maybe, Jenna, I don't know how you feel about this, but maybe we'll just do one example.
I think that's perfect.
And just really talk about either through Alejandra or just, whatever your thoughts are about the topic, so that we can really go get concrete and come up with some good examples. I'm fine being slightly more general and not having you guys spend a lot of time looking at Alejandra, just so that we can talk through how we might do this in a remote setting. So I'm going to pick for us, unless somebody has a favorite question. All right, so I'm going to pick the question that's on line 8 here, which is the student choice and voice question, which is, how can student choice be built into your lesson plan to facilitate this student's learning? So our examples are allowing students to choose high interest texts where appropriate, offering choice of manipulatives or graphic organizers, enabling students to vote on project focus, or choose from a selection of homework assignments. What might you do to answer this question, knowing what Alejandra's preferences are? How about more generally, how do we build student choice into remote learning, I guess, is a better general question. I think what makes me think of this is exactly the conversation we were having before around show and tell, right? Which is, that's a really good example of student choice, because what you're doing is you're saying, tell me something about yourself, and you're giving them the opportunity to pick what that is.
And for a 5th grade language arts lesson, it may just be as easy, for lack of better words, of like giving students 2 or 3 articles or passages that they could read, either topic driven, level driven, maybe some interest inventories ahead of time. It depends on what skill is supposed to be practiced. Like there's a whole lot of variables in there, but even just choosing what you get to read is a huge, huge piece in this. Either because it's at your independent level and you're sitting at home and you don't have help, or because you're really into the topic and you can read something a little bit harder because it maintains your attention.
Yep. Also choosing how you deliver the learning, or how the students are delivering what they've learned, and showing that they're understanding the content. We're more limited by technology, but maybe by offering, maybe students actually have more ideas about using technology to demonstrate their learning than we do.
We actually had that happen in one of our advanced high school classes. Like everyone had the same passage to read, essentially the same assignment, but they could show mastery of learning any way they wanted, even more creative than they might have been able to do in the physical classroom. And just listening to the language arts teacher share the ideas that the kids came up with were incredible. From PowerPoints to posters to visual representations to dances and songs and poems, and like they did, it was fun to hear what the kiddos came up with to show that they understood what they read.
That's also probably a good way to get to know students really well at the beginning of the year when you may not know them, is to just let them shine, let them show what they know.
One idea that I had is, so our students, it was quite challenging because the school that I work at, it's a Montessori school. So usually students are able to choose what work they want to work with, and they get to ask the teacher, okay, this is a lesson that I'd like to be presented. And then the teacher, you know, kind of sets it up in her schedule. So going to online, it was the first couple of weeks, it was just, okay, this is what we're going to do, period. So that was like a shock for our students that they weren't being able to really choose what they got to work with. But one idea that kind of came up was setting up a bingo board. So like, okay, you know, putting tasks in each box and then trying to get either a diagonal, up and down, straight across, or also another idea, which I've heard from other teachers, is just doing a menu. That was also another way that students still got to choose what they wanted to do, but they were still performing.
Yeah. So we have 10 more minutes, and I want to make sure that we go through, I just want to like just go through the rest of the questions real quick so that you guys can hear what they're asking. And if you guys have any thoughts or comments, feel free to stop me. The question about physical environment is exactly the same as the example, only it's for the individual student, right? So what adjustments can be made to the physical environment to help this student increase time on task? That could also be something like offering a special chair. We may not be able to offer a special chair right now, but we could encourage the student to find a space in their house or let them use a fidget. I know there's at least one person on this Zoom right now who likes to use fidgets.
This one or this one or the water bottle that has one built in. Oh,
yeah. If Christopher was still here, we worked with his school last year and we used a whole bunch of that floam, that like they're like little balls and they stick together like almost like clay. And we ended up giving his folks all the floam afterwards. And the teacher that we worked with was basically like all the students were like floam, making all sorts of cool stuff all day. So, you know, I think those things, you know, to the extent that we can help our students figure out what are the things that will help them focus. I have another friend who does all of her phone calls with a coloring book because she has ADD and she needs that sort of like focus point. So that's physical environment. What are the needs? The second question is agenda and pacing. So what are the needs of this student? How are the needs of this student reflected in your agenda/lesson plan? This is things like breaking the lesson into component parts to scaffold content delivery using strategic groupings and more hands-on activities. I would say you can be very creative about the different kinds of hands-on activities that you're doing in between some of the Zooms, especially if you have cooperative parents. I think it gets more challenging if you have a bunch of kids whose parents are not as available to help. That I think, you know, doing a scavenger hunt in a child's home, if the parent's not there to supervise and help, that might be really a big challenge. Any other types of agenda or pacing ideas that you guys have used or think work well?
I wonder even about in a remote setting of sending materials ahead of time, like via email, or we use Google Classrooms. So setting the student up for some pre-reading, especially with that learning disability piece, maybe with some extra audio supports or some extra pre-teaching materials so that when it comes to the actual instruction, they have something in their brain to attach the learning to.
And even sending the instructions ahead of time and the agenda with pictures and visuals that might be able to be more accessed. And if the parents aren't there guiding the learning, I think that can also be really helpful because then the kids can say, I know what I'm doing and here are the things that I have to do because I can see these pictures and I can understand, depending on the age. So we talked about the student choice and voice. And then the last question is, how can instruction be delivered through multiple modalities to maximize access to content for this student? You know, this one, again, challenging through remote settings, but, you know, there are creative ways of doing this as well. Doing some sort of role play or mock, whatever the case is, you know, mock arguments or debates, depending on the age again, sharing music, art, sports, you know, there's other ways. And, you know, one of the things that I've found to be particularly wonderful about remote instruction and remote connections right now is you can actually bring people to places that they wouldn't have been able to see or access before, and also people, right? So like I was watching our babysitter's piano recital, and there were people from all over the world who are participating, which is sort of a cool opportunity that, you know, we just wouldn't have thought about. So the multiple modalities, we are also stuck with a screen, so that becomes really challenging. Jenna, anything to add?
No, you've kind of hit it. I do want to say, Sarah had mentioned alternative seating and how in the classroom, it's one thing to do. I encourage you to work with your students who you know need the ball chair, need the wobbly cushion, need their fidget cube or whatever their fidget device du jour is. I encourage you to work with your school's administration to get it to the families when you're also providing other materials. A, if it's on the IEP, it's a legal requirement, so you gotta do it. But B, it's an important way to help connect the student with learning, even though they're not in a learning environment. Especially with some of our more severely disabled students, they may recognize, I'm thinking I have a student who, he knows that when he sits in the wobbly chair, you know, those chairs that let you move all around, he is learning. This is his learning time. And when we moved to virtual learning, it wasn't working. We got him a wobbly chair. Kids started paying attention because we had created a setup for him. We created a system and hadn't transferred it over. So to think through those basic things that seem so obvious to us in the classroom, seeing how we can work with families to transfer them over. On the back end, working with families to create those routines. First day of school is not going to look like the first day of school we've ever had in the history of our country, and frankly, in the history of modern education. What are you doing for your students on your caseload and for the students in your school to make the first day of school special? Still get dressed up. Still do those first day of school pictures. Have your school post them on their websites. You know, have parents send them in. Encourage the special routines because now more than ever, they're going to be important for the students. If we are allowed, and let's acknowledge that the mayor in DC announced different regulations, encourage your families to get dressed up, go walk around the block and come back in. So at least like you're feeling like you're doing something different for that first day. We need to mourn and grieve what we're not gonna have, especially the kindergartners and the freshmen and the seniors, the fifth graders, you know, those kids who it's the big years. So let's figure out how we can give them what they're missing, but at home. There's actually going to be more information on my website in the coming weeks about this. So please check back in on it, on how to create those special moments for your students online. I think, all right, it's 4:30 or it's 2:30. I'm sorry, 2:30. That's what happened when you have rest of world time. It says 14:30 on your computer and you read it wrong. To those of you who are here, Sarah and I don't know how to thank you enough.
Can you see that?
Can you put it whole screen?
Yep. I just didn't know if it was even sharing.
Yeah, so Sarah, I'm going to put in my website. Do you want to put in yours?
Oh, in the chat?
Yeah. You know what? I can pull it up. I got yours.
Okay.
You
know, we were planning this yesterday and we were like, by the time we're done, everyone's just going to be like a big fried mess. But we really appreciate that you guys are all here. It's Friday afternoon. You made it through. I have been posting a cheers drink on my Facebook page every Friday at 5 o'clock since this started, and people are like starting to get concerned about me, but
not the people who know why.
Exactly. But you know, I think this has been a really, really great conversation, and really want to thank you guys. If you guys want some ABC swag, put your email address in there and I will send it to you, because I know the importance of swag. Or else just shoot us an email and we'll take care of it. We really appreciate you guys.
Can I, final question?
Yeah.